After spending her teenage years in Liberia, West Africa, Pam Mcclusky returned to the US and began seeking out places that recognized African art. In 1980, she helped the Seattle Art Museum establish a department for the art of Africa, Oceania, and the Americas. Among the many riveting exhibitions she's curated are Is Egyptian Art African?, Sorry Business, Africa in America, and Long Steps Never Broke a Back. Most recently, she has curated new galleries for an expanded Seattle Art Museum and premiered a permanent gallery for Australian Aboriginal art. Please welcome Pam Mcclusky.
Good morning. Okay, let's take us there into the galleries. I hope you've all been there, standing in front of a sculpture or a painting or a display and wondering, what is this? Why is it here? And how do I make sense of it? From sharks and formaldehyde to reinvented icons from antiquity, museums can evoke confusion and disorientation as part of the discovery process. However, the guidance system that appears to augment this reaction is often a blunt text. Sometimes so blunt they function like mallets, pounding thought bubbles flat. Or they can be akin to a smoke bomb, releasing repetitive terms that hover in a foggy haze. Hanging by the thousands in museums, labels may leave many ideas bruised or ignored. Often a one-size-fits-all policy allows ineffective texts to conquer museum walls. What can be done to thwart this innocuous label domination syndrome, or ILDS? There are instances of artists and curators to mitigate ILDS. They need your support because invigorated texts can ignite responses and interest in ethical issues that are implied by collecting and interpreting art. In Kwame Anthony Appiah's book, Cosmopolitanism, Ethics in a World of Strangers, he cites museums as a place that can help us envision our role as cosmopolitans or citizens of the cosmos, urging us to have conversations across boundaries, to revel in the range of ways people live and respond to art that is not their own. Being cosmopolitan is defined as trying to be at home in all parts of the world, as distinct from being metropolitan, which is defined as relating to cities and home territories of imperial or colonial states. Speaking of the value of strangers, a doctor who conducts brain scans recently told me that our brains are most active when we are talking to someone we don't know. Perhaps objects that we don't know can be the next best thing to stimulate our minds. In many ways, museums are perfect training grounds for the citizen of the cosmos, and their texts can lead the way to be better equipped to deal with strange and unexpected creativity. Today, I'd like to offer 5 case histories of texts that we've unveiled at the Seattle Art Museum that break the mold to face a few of the ethical challenges that museums are involved in. Case number 1 is called a Bead Quiz, and it asks, instead of relying on labels alone, why not offer a quiz? The first manifestation of this was going through our collections and combing through and paying homage to the fact that beads are the earliest art form and act as magnets, pulling people into networks of contact that span continents and centuries. In searching, I found many that had never been on display, including this amazing garland for a living goddess from Nepal, things from Tibet, things by a local artist that used taxidermy, wonderful spike beads from Africa, beads made out of paper balloons, and a wonderful jacket made out of bamboo beads. Most hadn't been seen because they didn't fit the established categories of collecting and display. But then looking at the museum's holdings, I realized there's another whole category with beads. And I turned to a woman who has a closet filled. We borrowed enough to fill a wall. And it showcases that beads in their diminutive way traverse the world. And they offer a perfect chance to test all of our knowledge of world trade. You get a piece that is made in Venice of glass, but is mostly worn in Mali. You get, on the one hand, mink from the Bering Straits, or you get a crocodile jaw from Papua New Guinea. Or in one necklace, you have glass from Czechoslovakia again with Islamic script that is only worn in Africa. Then you get something from Canada that takes game beads of all sorts and puts them around your neck. By every case, we decided to use labels as beads and strung them for easy access to check, so visitors could check whether they could figure out where, how old, and what materials the beads were made from. For people who wish, we've issued a self-guided exam that they can take to figure out if they've gotten the most out of the display. No one's forced to take it, but for those who aspire to lifelong learning, why not consider displays as open book exams? Case number 2 is based on the decision to not use a label text, but to give an assignment. This installation is devoted to 4 suits that are not by Armani or Brooks Brothers. 2 are by an artist from Johannesburg, created in the last year. This one is based on weaving wire to formulate something that's kind of like a conquistador, and another that is more called a caterpillar suit, for all kinds of reasons. The other 2 are made in the same time period by an artist from Chicago, Nick Cave. He invents suits that are derived from everyday materials. Human hair, thrift store sweaters, fencing masks, and socks are among his base ingredients for sound suits that one isn't sure if you should run from or hug. Why these 4 suits emerge in this gallery, both from 2 very different cities at the same time period, and what they might do, is a question that has no exact answers and gives visitors a chance to exercise their imaginations. An assignment has been posted for viewers to contribute a statement to be shared with the artists and with others. Both artists have endorsed this approach as a reflection of their intent to invite, as Nick has said, moving from the familiar to the fantastic. Case number 3 involves collecting objects in their meetings as an ethical exchange. This interaction was engineered by a student intern from Kenya, Kakura Maimai Hamisi, whose community had sent him to the US to see what he could see. When he came to the museum, I introduced him to what we had in storage, and he was appalled to find objects with no names attached or meanings, and books about Maasai that featured their photogenic nature, but didn't note who was photographed and if they'd given their permission. Kakura was livid and in fact wouldn't speak to me for a couple of weeks. Then he just asked, shouldn't a Maasai collect Maasai art? At the end of his internship, he devised a very unique project where he came with a proposal to our trustees. If they would help build a one-room school, he would collect for us. He arrived at home and had to explain what a museum was to his community, and he said, it's a place where Wazungu or white people keep things from all around the world. Some couldn't understand it, but he said once the school was built, he said, I think my community was shocked, confused, and amazed by what we did, and in return, they began bringing forth artwork. The women of the community assembled a full array of bridal costume that involves 20 different necklaces, layered, each with intrinsic meanings attached. Elders provided, and this is the laying up in an artistic photograph of this, elders provided their finest authority staffs and a full set of Mancala game elements. Kakura throughout documented the process with interviews, narration, and written records. Now today, when you see this in the galleries, you can come up to a touch screen and go to Kenya and listen to each of the donors talk about what's in that artwork and why it's there. This has evolved into more exchanges between Seattle and this community that can be seen in a website that Kakura maintains, MaasaiAssociation.org. Case number 4 is called Long Conversations. And it's based on the assertion that labels are not always the best choice, especially when we're doing damage control about cultural misunderstandings. Perhaps the most obvious case that comes up is around a figure like this, that is often triggered with the term fetish. In fact, if you talk to a person from the Congo, like Fukiao Banseke on the left, he can recount a much different picture of that this artwork comes from a kingdom that converted to Christianity and evolved with a sculpture that embodies resolution. You meet in a law court, and when an agreement is reached, you take a nail, lick it, your saliva becomes your signature, which we now know with DNA testing is true, and you pound it into the figure so that all have a visual record of what you've agreed to. To counteract the Lion King distortion that happens with things like this, we devised an ad campaign. Discover a culture so advanced, they hammer out their differences without attorneys. This was around, but putting the background to this explanation and allowing its implications to sink in is difficult to fit into a short label. In this situation, I tried to provide direct access to original sources and started turning to advisors from the cultures of origin. It led to an exhibition called Long Steps, in which African advisors and artists were each asked to curate a section that they could explain. Visitors were encouraged to not only stand and walk through the galleries, but sit and listen to hear directly from, on the left, Konimo, a musician raised in the palace of the Asantehene of Ghana, or Gilbert Mbang, who we brought from Cameroon, who is the grandson of the king, among many others. How many times do Americans have direct access to such voices and personal accounts? There were kiosks in the galleries where each advisor narrated the art on view. The sign of success for me was during the last week when I was standing observing in the galleries without my badge on, and a woman just came up to me and said, "Aren't you sad to see this go?" and proceeded to tell me that she'd been 8 times and still hadn't gotten it all. The sign of failure for me was after this show traveled to other institutions, many of them did not use the audio and interview components, but gave written labels that offered or never mentioned insights coming from distinct individuals, and kind of created this idea that we place things there with the knowledge base of museum authority that is anonymous, kind of like Oz. When one of the guest curators and I went to see it at one museum that will remain nameless, we were both taken aback at the crush of convention and how heavy the feeling of ILDS, or innocuous label domination syndrome, was. Case number 5, the last, is passion for possession. This installation involved ballots. And ballots are a type of text not normally found in an art museum. What curators, directors, and trustees choose to collect is usually an extremely closely guarded decision-making process that takes place behind tightly closed doors. A few years ago, we did an installation where we invited every visitor to spend $10,000. The funding had been raised from deaccessioning. The gallery arranged 9 different ways that the money could be spent: on a single mask, on a return visit by artist Fred Wilson, on a historic rickshaw outfit from Cape Town, and the final choice was an assembly by a local artist. Each choice was labeled with an explanation about what it could do for the museum from my point of view, and every visitor was invited to spend the money but fill out a ballot and justify their vote with a written rationale. Tallies of votes were accumulated and the commentaries offered for everyone to see. Ballots put trust in public opinion. In this case, most visitors took their newfound influence seriously. Many people talked about what it was like to choose something not for yourself, but for everyone coming into a museum, and arguments flared up in the galleries about the ethics of collecting. Ultimately, however, the public vote was overwhelmingly for 400 men. 400 men made out of patches of cloth with Christmas tree light bulbs as penises. It is an assembly that you could not understand until you read the label. 400 headless men, They're made out of these casual elements, but their repetition is conscious. It is inspired by the artist's visit to Elmina Castle, a fort in Ghana where slaves were stored and loaded into ships. She walked into rooms where 400 men were kept, often for months, small, stuffy, and claustrophobic rooms. She spent every day for a year and a half on this assembly. It twists a playful first impression into a serious reminder of a disturbing historic episode. The ballot statements are very touching and went on and on. I think we find it difficult to comprehend tragedy on a massive scale. This piece of art helps us look at each person to imagine who they were, what they felt, and what they would have been if they were not slaves. The artist behind the work, Marita Dingus, has ended up giving more volunteer hours than any artist in the history of the institution. In this piece, she took on a very difficult subject and gave it a chance to be exposed. Many ballots and a strong label thereby suggested the value of tailored public involvement in what has been a guarded museum secret. When visitors walk into a gallery and stop to ask themselves, why is this here, they often count on a quick access to a blunt answer. Unfortunately, the heavy convention of uniform text has its downside, which I've just called ills. To counteract this syndrome, there are experiments to follow. I've shown just a few: a quiz, an assignment, a conversation, and a ballot. They are intended to guide visitors into looking at art with a sense of how it may seem strange or even be strange, but ultimately enables us to be better citizens of the cosmos. Thank you.